The staff laughed when he asked for the presidential suite. Minutes later, they were shocked Michael Carter had mastered the art of stillness. Not the kind that comes from peace, but the kind that comes from practice. He stood near the wide terminal windows at JFK, watching planes taxi across the gray morning runway. His reflection hovered faintly over the glass. Dark wool coat, simple charcoal sweater, tailored jeans, clean white sneakers. No flashy logos, no designer luggage screaming wealth, just a black carry-on and a leather backpack worn soft at the edges. He preferred it that way. Success had taught him something early. The louder you look, the quicker people decide who you are. And people were always deciding who he was. Manchester was supposed to be a break. 5 days. No boardrooms, no investor calls, no product demos, no negotiations over 8-figure valuations. Just space to breathe in a city he'd never properly explored. His phone buzzed softly in his pocket. A message from his COO. Everything's stable. Enjoy the trip. You've earned it. He allowed himself a faint smile. Earned it. That word always carried weight. He thought of his mother, Angela Carter, coming home after double shifts at the hospital cafeteria, shoes in hand because her feet were swollen. He remembered sitting at the kitchen table with a second-hand laptop that took 7 minutes to boot up, teaching himself to code from free forums while she slept in the next room. She used to say, "Michael, the world might not give you a head start, but it can't stop you from running." So he ran. Scholarships, computer science degree, freelance gigs, rejections, investors who loved his ideas but didn't see the vision. Corporate rooms where he was mistaken for IT support instead of the founder. A startup built in a 1-bedroom apartment, nights surviving on coffee and stubbornness. Now his tech firm powered logistics systems for multinational companies. Quietly, efficiently, brilliantly. And yet, here he stood, dressed like any other traveler, invisible again. Business class boarding begins now. He stepped toward the priority line. A tall man in a tailored Navy suit glanced at him, then looked back, then looked again. "Economy's that way," the man said casually, pointing behind them. Michael followed the direction of his finger, then met his eyes. "I know," Michael replied evenly. He held up his boarding pass. The man blinked, expression shifting from certainty to something less comfortable. "Oh. Right." No apology. There rarely was. At the counter, the airline agent scanned his ticket. Her smile was polished, procedural. She paused, typed something, paused again. "I'll just need to double-check this," she said, though nothing in her tone suggested technical difficulty. Michael watched the screen glow against her glasses. She examined his ID longer than necessary, compared the names, compared his face, compared something else only she could see. Finally, she handed everything back. "You're all set," he nodded. "Thank you." The exchange had taken less than a minute. It always took less than a minute. At security, the pattern continued. Random selection, additional screening, hands gliding more deliberately along his coat seams, his bag opened, laptop swabbed, shoes inspected. He complied without resistance. He'd learned long ago that dignity sometimes meant choosing which battles were worth fighting. As he gathered his belongings, a younger officer avoided eye contact. Michael almost felt sorry for him. Almost. On the plane, he found his seat, 4A, window. A woman already seated beside it stiffened slightly as he approached. Her handbag shifted closer to her chest in one fluid motion. He placed his bag overhead. "Excuse me," he said gently. She stood to let him pass, eyes scanning him the way security scanners had. He sat down, buckled in, and stared out the window. A flight attendant approached minutes later. "Sir, can I see your boarding pass?" Michael looked up slowly. Around him, other passengers were settling in undisturbed. "I already scanned it at the gate," he said calmly. "Of course," she replied quickly but waited. He handed it over. Her eyes flicked down. 4A. Business class. A quick nod. "Thank you." When she moved away, he exhaled, not heavily, not dramatically. Just enough. He'd once reacted differently. Years ago, in a glass-walled conference room in Silicon Valley, an investor had walked in, glanced at him, and asked where the CEO was. "I am the CEO," Michael had answered. The investor laughed. He didn't invest. That company folded 6 months later. Michael's did not. The plane lifted off. Clouds swallowed New York whole. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and allowed the hum of the engines to quiet his thoughts. This trip was not about proving anything. He repeated it silently. Not about proving. Manchester greeted him with a thin mist and streets that gleamed like polished stone. The car service drove past red brick buildings stitched between modern glass towers. Old-world architecture leaned comfortably beside sharp steel skylines. Rain tapped lightly against the window, blurring city lights into streaks of gold. It was elegant without trying too hard. Understated. He liked that. The driver chatted politely about football clubs and unpredictable weather. Michael listened, asked questions, let himself exist without analysis. When they pulled up to the hotel, it rose in quiet grandeur. Limestone facade, tall arched windows, subtle lighting outlining its architecture. Not loud, not gaudy, just confident. He stepped out, breathing in cool English air. 5 days. No presentations, no strategy decks, no explaining his credentials. Inside, the lobby stretched wide beneath a cascading crystal chandelier. Marble floors reflected warm light like liquid glass. A pianist played something soft and unintrusive near the bar. The air carried faint notes of citrus and polished wood. He walked forward, wheels of his suitcase whispering against stone. For a moment, he allowed himself to feel small in the best possible way. Not diminished, just untethered from responsibility. He approached the front desk. 2 receptionists stood behind it, immaculate in tailored uniforms. One looked up. Her expression was automatic at first. Professional warmth, rehearsed welcome. Then her eyes registered him. There it was. The smallest pause. The microsecond recalculation. Her smile tightened, not disappearing, just adjusting. "Good afternoon," she said. And in that nearly imperceptible shift, Michael felt it again. The weight of a first impression. He set his passport gently on the marble counter. "Reservation under Carter," he said. The chandelier light shimmered across the floor between them, and her smile faded, almost invisibly. The pattern was beginning again. "Reservation under Carter," Michael repeated calmly. The receptionist's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Her smile remained, but it no longer reached her eyes. "Of course, Mr. Carter," she typed, paused. Her colleague leaned slightly closer to the screen. There it was again, that nearly invisible exchange. Not words, not even full expressions, just a shared flicker of doubt. Michael stood comfortably, hands resting lightly on the handle of his suitcase. He had learned that posture mattered in moments like this. Not rigid, not defensive, simply steady. "I've booked the presidential suite," he added, his tone neutral, almost casual. The second receptionist blinked. "The presidential suite?" she repeated, not surprised, not impressed, just uncertain. "Yes." A few keys clicked, then stopped. The first receptionist cleared her throat. "May I see your ID again, please?" Michael didn't move for a second. "You have it," he said gently, nodding toward the passport still resting on the marble counter. "Yes, of course," she replied quickly, a faint flush rising in her cheeks. "Just standard verification." Standard. He slid the passport slightly closer to her. Behind him, the lobby murmured with low conversation. Glasses clinked softly at the bar. The pianist continued playing something elegant and restrained. But at the front desk, the air had shifted. The receptionist typed again, her brows furrowed. Her colleague leaned in further. "Is there an issue?" Michael asked, not accusing, just inviting clarity. "No issue," she answered too quickly. "We're just confirming." Another pause. Then she glanced toward a side office. "I'll just get my manager." Michael nodded once. Of course. The manager arrived within moments, a tall man in his early 50s, silver hair precisely styled, suit pressed to perfection. His name tag read, Jonathan Reeves. He offered a professional smile, the kind practiced in mirrors. "Good afternoon, Mr. Carter. I understand there's a question regarding your reservation." "No question from my side," Michael replied evenly. "I reserved the presidential suite for 5 nights. Jonathan gave a polite chuckle, the sound thin. "Yes, well, sometimes our system can experience minor errors, particularly with premium listings." Premium listings. Behind Michael, someone shifted closer. A couple pretending not to listen. A businessman openly watching. The manager's voice lowered slightly, but not enough. "You see, the presidential suite is typically reserved well in advance. I reserved it 3 weeks ago," Michael said. "Yes, of course." Another smile. "And while I'm certain you made a booking, it's possible the suite itself may not be available." A soft laugh came from somewhere behind him. Not loud, just enough. Michael felt it land. Jonathan leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice further. "However, I'd be delighted to offer you a complimentary upgrade to one of our junior executive suites." Upgrade. Michael let that word settle. "I didn't book a junior suite," he said calmly. The manager's smile tightened. "Of course. But these things happen." Michael looked directly at him. "Then let's verify it properly." Silence. Not dramatic, not explosive. Just heavy. Jonathan hesitated, then gestured to the receptionist. "Run it again," she typed. This time slower. Her eyes scanned the screen carefully. The other receptionist stepped closer. Seconds passed. Michael could feel the weight of the lobby's attention pressing against his back. The longer the silence stretched, the more it transformed into something public. A spectacle disguised as policy. He remembered another room years ago, different city, same feeling. An investor had once insisted on reviewing his credentials before allowing him to present. 15 minutes of unnecessary scrutiny while others watched. He had delivered the strongest pitch of his career that day. He had not received the funding. The receptionist inhaled sharply. Jonathan leaned in. "Well?" Her voice was quieter now. "It's confirmed." "What is?" he pressed. She swallowed. "The presidential suite. 5 nights. Paid in full." The words seemed to rearrange the room. Jonathan blinked once. "Paid?" he asked. "Yes, sir. Full payment processed." The second receptionist stepped back from the desk as if the screen had grown hot. Jonathan straightened, smoothing his jacket. "Well," he said, the smile returning. Wider now, warmer. "It appears everything is perfectly in order." Perfectly. The same man who minutes ago had suggested a system error now radiated hospitality. "My sincerest apologies for the confusion, Mr. Carter. You understand how these systems can be." Michael held his gaze. "I do," he said. Behind him, the businessman who had been watching suddenly looked at his phone. The couple turned away. The quiet laugh was gone. The atmosphere shifted, not back to neutral, but somewhere stranger. The receptionist's tone transformed. "Of course, Mr. Carter. We'll have your luggage brought up immediately." Another staff member appeared, as if summoned by invisible cue. "Allow me to personally escort you to the suite," Jonathan offered. Moments ago, the suite hadn't existed. Now it was an honor to deliver him to it. Michael inclined his head slightly. "Thank you." As they walked toward the elevators, the pianist's melody seemed louder, almost theatrical. The elevator doors slid closed with a soft hush. Jonathan exhaled, barely audible. "Again, my apologies. We pride ourselves on excellence." "I'm sure you do," Michael replied. The ride upward was silent, except for the faint hum of machinery. When the doors opened, a private corridor stretched ahead, carpet thick and silent underfoot. Double doors stood at the end, tall, polished, imposing. Jonathan opened them with a keycard. The presidential suite unfolded in quiet grandeur. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed Manchester's skyline, glass towers rising beside historic brickwork, streets shimmering from recent rain. A grand piano stood near the living area. Fresh white orchids rested on a marble table. The city looked almost cinematic from this height. "Champagne will be sent up immediately," Jonathan said. "Please inform us if there is anything at all you require." There it was again. Anything at all. Minutes earlier, they had questioned whether he belonged in the building. Now they hovered. Michael stepped inside. "Thank you," he said. The manager lingered a moment longer, as if waiting for something. Anger, perhaps. A reprimand. But Michael gave him nothing. Jonathan left. The doors closed softly behind him. The silence inside the suite felt different from the silence at the desk. This one was expansive, private. Michael walked slowly toward the windows. Below, the city moved without awareness of what had just happened upstairs. A knock came 10 minutes later. Champagne, 2 flutes, excessively chilled. The staff member delivering it avoided eye contact entirely. "Compliments of the hotel, sir." "Sir." The word landed differently now. Michael thanked him. When he was alone again, he didn't pour the champagne. Instead, he stood by the glass, watching his reflection merge with Manchester's skyline. He wasn't angry. That surprised him. He wasn't shocked either. What lingered was something heavier, a familiar understanding. The suite had never been the question. He had been. His phone vibrated softly in his pocket. He glanced down at the screen. Board dinner. Expansion contract. 8 p.m. Downstairs. He stared at the words for a moment. Outside, the city lights flickered on one by one. Inside the glass, his reflection looked back at him. Calm, composed, unreadable. The audience still didn't know the full truth. And neither did the hotel. By the time Michael stepped into the ballroom, the transformation was complete. Not of him. Of them. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above a sea of black tuxedos and evening gowns. The hotel's grand ballroom had been reimagined for the event. Soft gold lighting, tall floral arrangements in ivory and deep green, projection screens looping a sleek promotional video of the brand's future vision. Global, seamless, intelligent. The words floated across the screens in bold, confident typography. Michael adjusted the cuff of his tailored black suit. It fit him perfectly, sharp, deliberate, understated. No extravagance, just precision. The same man who had stood at the front desk earlier. Only now, no one was questioning whether he belonged in the room. Or at least, they weren't doing it out loud. Clusters of investors spoke in low, calculated tones. Journalists held champagne flutes in one hand and phones in the other. Senior executives from multiple countries mingled near the stage and scattered throughout the room. Staff, including the receptionist, including Jonathan Reeves. Jonathan saw him almost immediately. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across the manager's face, recognition mixed with discomfort. He adjusted his tie, suddenly very invested in a conversation with a board member beside him. He did not approach. Michael noticed. He always noticed. A server passed by with a tray. "Champagne, sir?" Michael declined politely. Across the room, the receptionist stood near the entrance with 2 other staff members, assisting guests. She hadn't yet seen him. The projection screens shifted. The room dimmed slightly. A subtle shift in energy moved through the crowd, the kind that precedes importance. Then he entered, Edward Langford, owner and chairman of the Langford International Hotel Group. Tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed. He carried himself not with arrogance, but with the relaxed confidence of someone accustomed to influence. Conversations quieted as he moved toward the stage. He spotted Michael almost instantly, and smiled. Not the rehearsed smile of hospitality, a genuine one. Edward stepped off course before reaching the podium and walked directly toward him. Heads turned. Jonathan froze mid-sentence. "Michael," Edward said warmly, extending both hands instead of one. "I'm glad you made it." Their handshake was firm, familiar. "It's good to see you, Edward," Michael replied. The use of first names did not go unnoticed. The room shifted again, subtle but undeniable. Investors leaned slightly closer. Journalists adjusted their stance. Staff exchanged glances. Edward gestured toward the stage. "Shall we?" Michael nodded once. As Edward stepped behind the podium, the light centered on him. The projection screens went dark. "Ladies and gentlemen," Edward began, his voice resonating effortlessly across the room. "Thank you for joining us tonight for what I consider one of the most pivotal moments in our company's history." Polite applause followed. For decades, Langford International has built its reputation on excellence in hospitality. Architecture, service, experience. He paused. But the world is changing. Travel is changing. And those who do not evolve fall behind. The screens flickered back to life, displaying sleek digital interfaces, smart room controls, predictive booking systems. "Tonight," Edward continued, "we officially launch the next phase of our global transformation, a fully integrated digital expansion that will redefine how our guests interact with our properties across 3 continents." Murmurs of approval rippled through the crowd. Edward smiled slightly. But innovation does not happen by accident. It requires vision. It requires courage. He glanced toward Michael. And it requires the right architect. A beat of silence. "I would like to introduce the man behind the technology powering this entire expansion." Jonathan's hand tightened around his glass. The receptionist turned fully toward the stage. Edward extended his arm. "Michael Carter, founder and CEO of Carter Dynamics, the strategic partner leading our multi-million-dollar international digital transformation." The words did not explode. They landed. Heavy, intentional, clear. For a moment, the room didn't react. Not because it wasn't impressed, but because it was recalculating. The same man some of them had quietly evaluated hours earlier now stood illuminated beneath stage lights as the architect of their future. Applause began slowly, then grew. Journalists raised their phones. Investors nodded in recognition. Jonathan's complexion lost color. The receptionist's expression shifted from confusion to realization, then to something sharper. Understanding. Michael stepped onto the stage. He did not rush. He did not grin. He stood beside Edward, accepted the applause with a composed nod, then moved to the podium. Silence settled. He looked out at the audience, at the executives, the press, the staff lining the walls. He began calmly. "Technology should never replace human experience," he said. "It should enhance it." His voice was steady, controlled, unforced. "At Carter Dynamics, we don't build systems for attention. We build systems for access, for efficiency, for connection." The screens behind him displayed live simulations of the software platform, seamless booking transitions, intelligent guest profiling, real-time operational analytics. "This partnership," he continued, "is not about luxury. It's about evolution." He paused. His eyes moved briefly, deliberately, toward the section of the room where hotel staff stood. "Innovation," he said, "requires more than capital. It requires perspective." The room leaned in. "And perspective," he added quietly, "comes from understanding that opportunity does not always arrive packaged the way you expect." The sentence was smooth, measured, not accusatory, but it carried weight. Somewhere along the back wall, someone shifted uncomfortably. Michael did not raise his voice. He did not name anyone. He simply continued. "Great organizations succeed when they see beyond first impressions, when they recognize value based on substance, not surface." A beat, and when they do, the results speak for themselves. Applause erupted again, stronger this time, because the message wasn't just technical, it was human. Edward stepped forward, placing a hand briefly on Michael's shoulder before reclaiming the podium to close the announcement. As the formal presentation ended, executives surged forward to congratulate him. Impressive platform. Brilliant integration model. Looking forward to the rollout in Dubai. The same room that might have overlooked him hours earlier now orbited around him. Jonathan approached cautiously. "Mr. Carter," he said, voice tighter than before. "Congratulations. An extraordinary achievement." Michael regarded him calmly. "Thank you." Nothing more. The receptionist remained at a distance, eyes lowered, her earlier composure replaced by reflection. Without this partnership, the expansion would stall. Without the software, the global rollout would collapse. Without Michael, the future Edward had just promised investors would be impossible. That truth hung in the air, invisible but undeniable. Edward returned to Michael's side once the crowd thinned. "I told you Manchester would appreciate what we're building," he said lightly. Michael allowed a faint smile. "They will," he replied. Edward studied him for a moment, perceptive, seasoned. Then, lowering his voice just enough, he asked, "Everything satisfactory with your stay?" It wasn't a casual question. It was careful. A pause stretched between them. Michael glanced briefly across the ballroom, at the staff, at the polished marble entrance beyond, at the quiet calculations still settling into place. Then he met Edward's eyes. "I've learned a lot today." The answer hovered there, ambiguous, deliberate. Edward held his gaze a second longer, understanding that the sentence carried more than it revealed. Around them, the ballroom shimmered with celebration. But beneath the chandeliers and applause, something deeper had shifted, and not everyone in the room would forget it. The applause faded. The ballroom slowly returned to its natural rhythm, laughter, clinking glasses, low strategic conversations disguised as celebration. But something fundamental had shifted, not in the company, in the room, and especially in the people who had stood behind the front desk that afternoon. Michael was halfway down the private corridor toward the elevators when he heard footsteps behind him. "Mr. Carter." Jonathan Reeves, the manager's voice no longer carried polished authority. It carried something else, urgency restrained by pride. Michael turned. Jonathan approached alone this time. No audience, no marble counter between them. "I was hoping we might speak privately," he said. They stepped into a quiet sitting area just off the corridor. Leather chairs, low lighting, city skyline stretching beyond tall windows. Jonathan remained standing for a moment before finally sitting across from him. "I owe you an apology," he began. Michael said nothing. Jonathan inhaled slowly. "Earlier today at the front desk, there were assumptions made. That should not have happened. Not we were wrong, not we judged you. Assumptions." Michael watched him carefully. "I strive to run this property with the highest standards," Jonathan continued, "and I regret that your arrival did not reflect that." Michael folded his hands loosely. "I appreciate the apology," he said calmly. Jonathan seemed relieved, too quickly. But Michael wasn't finished. "If I hadn't been who I am," he asked evenly, "what would have happened?" The question settled between them like weight on glass. Jonathan's mouth opened slightly, then closed. He didn't answer immediately. Because he couldn't. If Michael hadn't been the architect of a multi-million-dollar expansion, if he hadn't been introduced on stage, if he had simply been a successful black man on vacation. The silence revealed the truth more clearly than any explanation. Jonathan's voice softened. "We would have resolved it." "Eventually?" Michael asked. Another silence. The power dynamic had shifted completely. Not aggressively, not theatrically, just undeniably. Michael wasn't angry. He wasn't threatening contracts. He wasn't demanding consequences. He was simply holding a mirror. And Jonathan could see himself clearly in it. "I will address this internally," Jonathan said quietly. "I hope you do," Michael replied. Not for me. He didn't need to say it. Jonathan nodded once, understanding more than the words conveyed. Later that evening, there was another knock at his suite door. The receptionist stood outside. Her composure from earlier was gone. She looked younger now, less rehearsed. "Mr. Carter," she began softly, "I wanted to apologize as well." He stepped aside, allowing her to speak comfortably in the entryway. "I misjudged the situation," she said. "It wasn't intentional." Michael studied her. "Most prejudice isn't. That was the part people struggled to understand." "I wasn't laughing at you," she added quickly. "It was just unexpected." "Why?" he asked gently. She hesitated. The answer hovered there, fragile, uncomfortable. "I suppose we don't often see—" She stopped herself. He waited. She exhaled. "We don't often see someone like you book that suite." There it was, honest, unfiltered. Michael nodded slightly. "That's the problem," he said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He didn't educate her with statistics or stories of injustice. He simply let the statement stand. She swallowed, eyes lowering. "I'm sorry," she said again. "I know," he replied, but he didn't offer reassurance. Growth rarely comes from comfort. She left quieter than she arrived. The following morning, Edward Langford requested a private breakfast meeting. They met in a smaller dining room overlooking the city. Sunlight filtering through tall windows, Manchester washed in silver-gray light after overnight rain. Edward stirred his coffee slowly. "I don't need details," he said. "I read people well enough to know something happened." Michael considered his response. "I experienced hesitation," he said evenly. Edward's jaw tightened slightly. "That shouldn't have occurred." "No," Michael agreed. Edward leaned back. "Our brand is built on perception," he said. "But perception must never become prejudice." He paused. "There will be internal reviews, training adjustments, structural changes." He wasn't offering damage control. He was offering acknowledgement. Michael nodded once. "That's all I expect." Edward studied him carefully. "You handled it with restraint," he said. "Many wouldn't have." "I've had practice," Michael replied. That answer lingered longer than either of them intended. The rest of his stay unfolded differently. Staff greeted him with precision, perhaps too much precision. Doors opened faster. Voices softened. Eye contact lingered longer than before. Respect, yes, but also awareness. Michael moved through the hotel quietly observant. He watched how other guests were treated. He noticed the subtle differences in tone, posture, patience. Prejudice, he reflected, is rarely loud. It does not always shout. It does not always slam doors. Sometimes it simply hesitates. In a double check. In a second glance. In a question that wouldn't have been asked twice. It hides in politeness. In disbelief masked as procedure. In surprise disguised as policy. And because it whispers instead of screams, it survives longer. On his final morning, Manchester woke under clear skies. He stood at the window of the presidential suite one last time, the city stretching confidently beneath him. The room had never defined him. The marble, the chandeliers, the height. None of it altered who he was. It simply revealed who others believed he could be. He packed calmly, no rush, no tension. When he descended to the lobby, the atmosphere was noticeably different. The receptionist greeted him first. "Good morning, Mr. Carter." No hesitation, no recalculation. Jonathan stepped forward personally to oversee checkout. "Your stay has been fully arranged," he said. "We hope to welcome you back soon." Michael nodded. "Perhaps," he replied. The transaction took less than a minute. Efficient, professional, uncomplicated. As he turned toward the exit, the glass doors reflecting soft daylight, he noticed someone standing near the concierge desk. A young black employee, perhaps early 20s, neatly dressed in hotel uniform. Their eyes met. No words passed between them, but recognition did. Not recognition of wealth, not recognition of status, recognition of possibility. The employee's posture straightened slightly, almost imperceptibly. Michael gave a subtle nod, and in that quiet exchange, something more meaningful than the contract had taken place. Outside, the air was crisp. A car waited at the curb. As he stepped inside, he glanced once more at the hotel's towering facade. True status was never in the room you book. It's in the way you carry yourself when the world assumes you don't belong there.